Hey everyone, in this video I'll be showing you how to build a Lumenier QAV X. This is actually my favorite frame right now. The QAV X comes in two different versions, 3mm and 4mm. So they are exactly the same except for the thickness of the bottom plate, which is this part right here. And the QAV X is a perfect X 215mm frame. Perfect X meaning the distance from motor to motor is all the same distance. So this is a really good frame for freestyle flyers because it feels really balanced on all axes for flips, rolls, stuff like that. So as you can see, I've built two. Actually, I built three over here. 3 quads. Running different parts to see which one I like the best. So this red one right here is running the red rotor PowerOSD KISS flight controller, KISS 24 amp ESCs with the Lumenier 2206 2350 kV motors. The blue one is running the PowerOSD PDB KISS flight controller DYS XS20A running BLHES and the EMAX 2205 2300 kV motors. So both of these quads run really well, but the KISS Lumenier combo costs about $85 more than the KISS DYS EMAX combo to build. So in my tests running the same frame and similar PIDs, they fly nearly identical. I was surprised at how well these XS20A run. They run almost just as good as the KISS ESCs that cost twice as much. So, and also on the motors, I actually prefer the EMAX over the Lumenier motors. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Lumenier motors are great and they run super smooth, but for the price, you can't beat the EMAX. The Lumeniers feel a tiny bit smoother, but the EMAX motors are just monsters. There's so much power, so powerful. Also, the casing on the Lumenier motors are a little bit thin, so not as much, I guess, motor screw thread, or not as much thread can grab on the motors, because I had one of them come off the frame when I hit a soccer goal post. It fell off the frame and it ripped the wires off the ESC. So on the PDB, I'm using the red rotor RROSD and the quad Revo PowerOSD. So I've used the red rotor on 3 different quad builds now, and I've never had really good results. I feel like the LC filter in the red rotor is not as good as the PowerOSD. Somehow the video never looks as clean, so I decided to go with the PowerOSD in the build. So the PowerOSD is a basic PDB with built-in OSD. So it basically shows you battery voltage, current, amp draw, amps used, and an actual flight timer. So an actual flight timer means the timer only counts when the throttle is above 0. So it's really easy to use. It's basically plug and plays, no configuration needed. And then so in this video I'll be showing you how to build this blue one with the KISS flight controller. Really nice flight controller. You can check out my other posts on it. The DYS XS20A EMAX 2205 2300 kV. I'll be using the Foxeer HS1177 camera. I thought about using the arrow, but the mounting holes on the arrow is a little bit larger than the HS1177. As you can see right here, the frame holds this camera really nice. I'm not even using the screws for the camera. You can feel there's really good friction on it, so you really don't even need the screws on it. And I'll be using the FR Sky XSR receiver down here running S-Bus and smart port telemetry to the KISS. I'll show you how to set all that up later. And as I said earlier, this one is running the KISS flight controller. Really nice flight controller, very easy to set up and tune, flies very well. We'll get into this later. So on this quad, I'm running the Lumenier 600 milliwatt VTX, but I've been testing this Foxeer TM25 switcher, and it's been working really well. This is a 5.8 gigahertz 40 channel race band VTX that lets you select a power output from 25, 200 to 600 milliwatt. So it's really nice and adaptable VTX that's cheap. I think it's around 33 bucks or something like that. I've been using it and it's been working really well. So you can pick whatever video transmitter you want to use. And also I've been testing these Foxeer antennas versus the TBS Triumph antennas. From my test, the video quality looks almost exactly the same. No better, no worse on both. You can't even tell the difference. But I'll say that the TBS antennas are super tough. It looks like on the insides of these antennas, they're filled with some kind of foam or something that makes them super durable. I've crashed a whole lot in these and I still haven't damaged an antenna. These are a little scratched up when it dropped a little bit and my propellers chopped them up, but they still work fine and they're not broken. But the Foxeer antennas are only about $9 each, whereas the TBS are 40 bucks a set. So it's a good idea to grab a couple of these for just backup. Keep them in your box in case something happens. Okay, so let's get on with the build. So the QAV X is a X pattern 215 millimeter shaft-to-shaft frame with a short body. So that means this frame is pretty tight. It uses 27 millimeter standoffs instead of the regular 35 millimeter, which is pretty much standard on all other quads. So everything in this quad will be direct solder. So because the frame is so tight inside, there's not much room inside the frame for like pin headers and connectors or anything like that. So if you've never soldered before, just check out my other post on soldering basics, and I also go over a lot of different methods for soldering various wires and stuff like that. But don't worry, everything is very easy. Direct solder is the best way to build quads because you cut down on issues of connectors coming apart during a crash or anything like that. Okay, so let's get started with the build. First thing we're going to do is we're going to solder the ESCs onto the motors. So you're just going to remove the wrap off the ESCs. I'll just show you how to do one of them. The rest you can kind of figure out. Just remove the signal and the ground for now. Makes it easier for us to get it on the KISS later. There, and then and then once again I'll be using my little cheat sheet for the build. So I'm just gonna cut the motor wires to the length that's on here. Where's my cutter? And then I'm just gonna splice and tin the ends. So when you're soldering, it helps a lot when you pre-tin the leads. It makes soldering so much easier. So I'm just gonna take off the leads here. Whoops. I got my motor tinned, and then I'm just gonna tin the pad on the ESC. When you're tinning the pad, just touch the pad and then touch with the solder the same area where the soldering iron touches the metal. Just like that. It's real simple. Alright, so I'm just gonna solder one of the motor wires, or I mean one of the motors onto the ESCs. And this one, all you do is melt the solder on the ESC first, and then you take the motor lead and you touch it on there. And the melted solder should help the solder on the motor lead melt and join. So when you do this, you want to make sure the solder is nice and shiny after it's done. So once you've done that to the ESCs and all the motors, this is what you should end up with. You should have two that the ESCs go straight across to the motors, and then two where one of them is crossed, or two of them is crossed, like that. So motors 1 and 4 are going to be straight, and then 2 and 3 are going to be crossed. Anytime along this build, if you ever get confused or lost about what to hook up to what, just go to my website and I have a schematic of this entire build drawn out, so you can figure out, you know, what you need to connect on what. Since everything in this build is going to be direct solder, now we're going to prepare the PowerOSD for soldering. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove this pin header. All of the PowerOSDs come with this video transmitter connector already connected. That's how they test the board, but we're not going to need this, so we're just going to remove it. Best way to do that is just remove the plastic housing on the pin headers, and then you're going to solder and then remove each one of them individually. So to remove the headers, all you're going to do is you're going to hold on to one end of the header, and then you're going to melt the solder on the other end until it comes out like that. Sometimes the solder they use is a little stubborn. You can add a little bit of your own solder to help it melt faster, because some of these are a little bit stubborn. So once you have the solder loose, you can just pull them out. So next we're going to install the camera cable and the VTX cable onto the PowerOSD. So first we're just going to cut our wires. Again, I'm going to use my little cheat sheet here. This is camera cable. Again, if you're not using this cheat sheet, you can just put it on your quad and kind of measure it out. And this is the connector for the Lumenier. I think it's the TX5G6 or something. So we're just gonna cut these wires off, and then you're not gonna use these two at the end, this red and white one, because this is for audio and we're not using that. So you can just go ahead and remove them from the housing. Just stick something sharp in there and lift it up and pull it out. And then once again, we are gonna direct solder everything onto this quad. So get this. So before we solder into the PowerOSD, we're just gonna strip the leads and then tin them. It's very important to tin them when you're putting these through the tiny little holes on the PowerOSD, because if you don't tin it, it's very hard to get them through the hole without having a big mess of wires come out from the sides. So I've stripped the wires, and then now I'm just going to tin the leads really lightly. And the way you do that is you touch the solder on the wire, and then you use the soldering iron to touch the solder, and then when it melts, it'll put a light little coat of solder onto the wire. So do the same thing with the camera cable. So this is how I direct solder the camera cable and the VTX cable. So first I'm going to add more solder to the holes until you get a tiny little bubble. Do it on all the holes. So first I'm going to do the signal on the camera. You can see it's labeled right here, camera, signal, power, ground. So when you're doing these, it's easiest to do the one that's furthest away from you, so that way you have more room to work with. So to solder these, you just kind of melt the solder till it's melted, and then you can take the pre-tin wire and just kind of poke it through the hole while the solder is melted, and it should just go right in. And now I'm just going to do the signal. Same thing, melt the solder and then poke the wire through. And they're just going to hold the wire until the solder hardens. And just do the same for the rest of them. So that's my camera. Now I'm going to do my VTX, same thing. I'm going to do the signal first. Just like that, we're done. So next we're going to put the power cable onto the PowerOSD. I already put the mesh around the battery cable and put the positive through the positive hole, negative through the negative hole. So on this one I didn't do any pre-tinning on the leads because you really don't need to. I'll show you how to do it. All you do is make sure the wire is kind of sitting through the hole, and then you just go around and you just start melting solder around the power lead. And eventually the solder will just melt onto the wire. Just get a nice thick coat around it. And that's it. Now I'm just going to do the negative lead. And then when you're done, you should have a nice shiny looking solder right here. Okay, so once you mounted the camera cable and the VTX cable with the battery cable on the PowerOSD, this is what you should end up with. The only thing you really need to configure on the PowerOSD is this little jumper back here. If you're running an NTSC camera, just leave the jumper open, which is what I'm running. If you're running a PAL camera, just close the jumper. Just put a blob of solder across these two. Okay, so I already put the standoffs onto my frame right here. So I'm just going to put the PowerOSD on there, and then just temporarily, I'm just going to put one little nut over here to keep the PowerOSD down. You don't really want to put the other standoffs on there right now, because if you do, you'll probably just end up burning them when you're mounting the ESCs, like I always do. So next we're going to mount the motors onto the frame. Before we do that, I'm going to put these bigger heat shrinks onto the arms, because if you don't do that now, you won't be able to put it on once you put the motors on. And all these little miscellaneous parts like the heat shrinks and the wires and all that stuff will be included in the kit if you get the kit. So I'm just going to I'll show you how to do one of them. I'm just going to snap on one of these motor guards, and they're going to go on the bottom of the frame like this. And then, okay, so when you're mounting the motors, The motor diagram on the KISS ESCs are a little bit different from the Clean Flight. Clean Flight, it goes motors 1, 2, 3, 4. But for KISS ESC, the motor diagram is 1, 2, 3, 4. So for the Emax motors, 1 and 3 are going to be the straight across motors like this. And then 2 and 4 will be the crossed like this. I'll show you what I mean once I get everything on here. Oh, before you put this on, just go ahead and put the heat shrink onto the ESCs. If I could ever get it in. Put it on like this. And then this is a straight, so and then I'm gonna slide this under the arm. And then I'm just gonna put the motor screws on the backs of these. Okay, so once you have your motors mounted, this is what it should look like. Just keep in mind, motors 1 and 3, the wires are straight across. 2 and 4, the motors are crossed, or the wires are crossed. So next, we're gonna mount the power cables, the ESC power cables onto the PowerOSD. I didn't make a cheat sheet for this one because depending on where you mount the wire on here, it kind of varies the length of the wire. So on this one, you just kind of measure it out. You're just gonna grab a wire. All the negatives are gonna go on this side, positives go on this side. So just one tip I can offer you is when you're doing this, it's easiest to do 2 wires at a time. So like, I'll just show you how to do the first one. I'm just gonna do the ground here. So I'm just gonna kind of just eyeball it a little bit and just cut a wire. Just pick a spot on the ESC, or I mean on the power distribution board, and then just kind of measure your wire, cut it, and then just snip it. On this one, you'll want to strip the wire and pre-tin, because it'll make soldering a lot easier when you get to that part. So I'm just going to tin the wires here. And then I'm going to tin the little part on the PDB that I chose for these 2 wires. So I'm just going to put a nice little blob right here. And the way I do it, I just kind of use my hands. Just put these together. But try not to grab too close to the wire because it's going to get super hot. I just hold it there a little bit, and then to do this, I just heat the melt the solder on the bottom part, the part that's on the power distribution board, and then I move up to the ESC wires. And when you do that, it'll form a nice bond, and then I'll just get some pliers or some needle nose, whatever, tweezers, and then just finish the job. There you go. So that's how I do it on this power distribution board. So you're just gonna do the same thing with the negatives and the rest of the positives and the negatives. Just pick 2 wires at a time, and then just find a little spot on the power distribution board and just solder it on. So here's just a little close-up of how I solder on the power distribution board. I've already cut the wires and pre-tinned them, and then I put a little spot on the power distribution board where I'm going to put the wires. So first I'm just going to kind of melt this wire or the solder that's on the power distribution board, and then I'll put the wires on there. And you'll see that everything is nice and melted now. Once I get a nice little bond, I'll kind of move my tweezers and push down on it. Whoops, this one's kind of sticking up. So this is what your quad should look like after you've mounted your ESC power cables. I'll have a picture of this on my website if you want to see how I routed everything. So next we're just going to install a VBAT cable for the flight controller. So I'm just going to use my little cheat sheet again. measure that. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to run a VBAT cable coming out the left side of the power distribution board that's going to wrap around and go on top of the flight controller for powering the board. Oops. So once again, I'm just going to pre-tin my wire and then find a little spot on the power distribution board for it. Alright, so I'm just going to put my VBAT right here for the negative and positive. I left a little spot in the middle for the VBAT cable. So same thing, you're just going to melt the solder on the power distribution board first, and then you'll put the wire on top of it and it'll just bond just like that. Same thing here, melt this part and then put the wire on top. So that's just going to wrap on top and then go to the flight controller right there. So next we're going to prepare the KISS flight controller to be mounted. So first we're just going to solder everything onto the KISS. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little 2-pin 90-degree header on the V in, and I'm going to put it on the top of the board. That just makes it, I decided not to put or direct solder this, because if you do it, it's a little bit harder to move the board around if you need to work on it. So I'm just going to put a little 2-pin on top of the board. On one of my builds I put it on the bottom and it made it really tight without much room to work with. So I decided to move it to the top. So I'm just going to put one of the pins in, and then you can slightly move it with your hand like that, reposition it. I like to have a little tilt, get it away from the processor so you have more room to put your connector. So once you have it in place, now you can solder in the other lead. Like that. And then now we're going to prepare the XSR cable, and we're going to direct solder it onto the KISS. So we're going to be removing this green wire because this green wire is PPM and we're not using PPM. So just take that out. So we're just going to be using the white, which is signal, yellow, which is telemetry, power, and ground. So once again, I'm just going to use my little cheat sheet here and then cut out what I need. So the signal, power, ground is going to be cut one length, and then the telemetry will be cut a separate length because it's away from the other pins. Alright, so I'm just gonna splice and pre-tin the leads right here. Okay, so this is how you're gonna connect the XSR onto the KISS flight controller. I'm just gonna pre-tin the leads I need. This is gonna be signal, power, ground for the XSR, and then I'm gonna use auxiliary 1 for the smart port. So I'll pre-tin them, and the way you solder these on there without destroying these tiny little wires, all you do is you melt the solder again, and then you just touch the wire in there and you let go, and you just don't move it until the solder hardens. So when you do this, you don't want to apply too much heat on the pad, because that's what destroys the pads and makes the pads come off. You just want to touch it really quickly and then put the wire in. Okay, so next we're going to install the signal leads for the ESCs. So on a KISS flight controller, instead of labeling it motor 1, 2, 3, and 4, they label it PWM 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 is going to be right here. Wait, what? Right here. The signal leads are the pads without any holes. Like you'll see right here, this has 1 hole, this has 2. Signal pads have no holes. So this is 1, 3, 2, and 4. So just remember that the leads, the signal pads are on the exact opposite. So 1 and 2 are on one pad here, and then 4 and 3 are on opposite sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take the signal wires we got off the ESCs earlier. I'm going to untwist it, and then I'm just going to use the black lead on them, because black is a little bit easier to see. Or actually, you can just cut them off because we're not using the connectors anyway. So I'll cut it off, and then I'll just show you how to do one of them. So I'm just going to measure out signal 1. And then I'm just going to pre-tin signal pad 1. And then to install these is exactly like what we did on the XSR. You're just going to melt the solder on the pad and then touch the wire on there. Just like that. So you're just going to do the same thing with motor wire 3, 2, and 4. But just keep in mind, this is the direction that we're going to be mounting the flight controller. So motor wire 1 is going to go this way, and then 2 on the other side will point this way, 3 will point this way, but I'm going to run 3 under the flight controller. So I'm going to solder it this way, and then I'm going to roll this under like that, and then 4 is going to point to motor 4. So this is what the KISS should look like once you have the signal wires installed on there. So we're just going to put on one more thing before we mount the KISS, and that's the buzzer. So the buzzer is going to go on the back of the KISS. The 5 volt is going to be right there. You can see that. 5 volt, and then buzzer ground. So I'm just going to pre-tin these, and then I'm just going to hook up the buzzer negative to the buzzer ground, and then the 5 volt to the positive. And then I'm gonna point the buzzer like this way, because it's gonna be mounted towards the front of the quad. So it's gonna be like this. So this is your KISS all soldered up. Looks a little messy right now, but once we get it on the quad, it won't look so bad. So what we have here is, you have PWM1. This is how it's actually going to be mounted. Like this. Your XSR is going to be in the back right here, and then your PWM1 is right here, goes to motor 1. Signal 2 is on the back. 2 goes here. 3 is right here, and it goes under and it comes out this way, motor 3. And then 4 is on the other side right here, on the other side of the 3, and it'll go to motor 4. Alright, so now that we got the KISS all soldered up with everything, now we can mount it onto the quad. So the mounting holes on the KISS are 30 by 30, but most quads mounting flight controller pattern is 30.5 by 30.5, but it doesn't matter. If you just push the standoffs in a little bit, it should go on there without a problem. Just like that. Alright, so next we're just gonna solder up the ESC signals to the ESCs. So ESC signal 1 is gonna go to 1, and then 2 on the other side right here is gonna go 2. 3 is right here going under, coming out right here, and then 4 is on the other side of this 3 is gonna go here. So I've already pre-tinned all the wires. So the way you put these on is just like putting it on the flight controller. You just touch the solder, and then when it's melted, you just put the wire in there quickly. That's 1. 2 goes over here. So there's just one last thing I do before I plug in any new builds. This is a basic multimeter, and I'm just gonna set it on the continuity setting. So the continuity setting basically just tells you if you have a short somewhere in the quad, or you can use it to test a connecting flow or a connected connector. So here I'm just gonna connect the leads up to the battery, and if you have a short, you're gonna hear it beeping. Not that one, that always does that. So I'm just gonna introduce a artificial short. So that's just a easy way to rest your mind to make sure nothing is shorted before you plug in the battery. So I'm just gonna cover up this ESC again because I don't want anything touching the carbon fiber. So that's what you should hear after you plug in your battery. So at this point, we're pretty much done with the building part or the soldering part on the quad. Check back soon for part 2 of the video where I'll show you how to set up the Tyrannus, do all the configurations in the KISS configurator, and then we'll go for the test flight. So I hope you found this video helpful. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.